Imagine this. Years of hard work, every penny you've ever saved, gone in an instant. But not because of an accident or a bad investment. No, it was taken by someone you thought you knew, someone who promised you love, a future, a dream. But what happens when the victim decides to take matters into their own hands? When a betrayal so profound forces a person to cross continents for answers? This is the story of Susan Carter, a 52-year-old woman who thought she'd found love online. Instead, she found herself living a nightmare. But what she did next shocked everyone. Hey, True Crime Secrets family, a huge thank you for your support. Your views and comments mean everything to us. We're committed to bringing you daily, gripping true crime stories that keep you on the edge of your seat. Your feedback has shaped this channel, and we're just getting started. If you haven't subscribed yet, make sure to hit that button so you don't miss out. Thanks again for being part of the journey. Stay curious, stay safe, and keep uncovering the secrets. Susan Carter was, by all accounts, an ordinary woman leading a quiet life in a small Ohio town. At 52 years old, she had seen her fair share of challenges. A widow for nearly a decade, she worked tirelessly to provide for her family and rebuild her life. For Susan, love was something she had placed on the back burner until one fateful evening when an unexpected message popped up on her screen. The sender was David Marks, a man who seemed to be everything Susan had been missing. He was charming, attentive, and most of all, understanding. David said he was a successful entrepreneur working overseas, living the kind of life Susan had only dreamed of. He was quick to share photos of himself in sharp suits, standing in front of luxury cars, and dining at exclusive restaurants. He told Susan he was looking for someone genuine, someone who could see past his wealth and connect with the man beneath it all. And Susan believed she had found that person in him. Over weeks, their conversations grew deeper. David made Susan feel valued, special, like she was the only person in the world who truly understood him. Soon, she found herself sharing everything, her hopes, her fears, and even her finances. And when David confided in her about an urgent business deal that had run into complications, Susan didn't hesitate to help. After all, he promised to pay her back in full as soon as he sorted things out. It started with small amounts, just a few $100s here and there, but those small amounts quickly grew. In just 6 months, Susan had wired David every penny of her $87,000 life savings, money she had spent years building as a safety net for her retirement, her children, her future. But as the weeks turned into months, something changed. The messages became less frequent. The promises of repayment were delayed, and eventually, David Marks disappeared entirely. For most, this would have been the end of the story, a tragic tale of deception, heartbreak, and financial ruin. But Susan Carter wasn't ready to let it end there. Fueled by a sense of betrayal and determination, she made a decision that would take her far beyond her quiet Ohio town. Susan was about to embark on a journey that would uncover the truth about David Marks. A truth she could never have prepared herself for. Susan Carter wasn't just any widow. She was someone who had given her entire adult life to her family and her late husband. For 30 years, she built a life of stability and love. But when her husband passed away suddenly from a heart attack, that life shattered. For the first time in decades, Susan found herself alone. Her children were grown and living lives of their own, and the house that once echoed with laughter and conversation had fallen silent. For years, Susan avoided the idea of moving on, but as her days turned into months and months into years, the ache of loneliness became harder to bear. It was during one of those quiet evenings, sitting alone at her kitchen table, that she decided to try something new. With a hesitant hand, she downloaded a dating app. One that promised to connect people not with fleeting interests, but with meaningful connections. It was there that Susan first encountered David Marks. David's profile was captivating. He was well-dressed, articulate, and seemed to share Susan's longing for something real. His bio mentioned that he was a successful entrepreneur, often traveling for business, and that he missed having someone to share his life with. When he messaged her for the first time, it was simple and charming. "You have a smile that lights up a room. I'd love to get to know you." For Susan, it was the start of something she hadn't felt in years, a sense of being seen, of being appreciated. Their conversations quickly blossomed. They exchanged life stories, shared inside jokes, and even spent hours on video calls. David appeared to be thoughtful and attentive, remembering small details about Susan's life that no one else had asked about in years. Slowly, the walls she had built around her heart began to come down. But as she would later realize, it wasn't love she was inviting into her life. It was something else entirely. As their connection deepened, David began to share more about his life. He told Susan about the challenges of running his business, how his work often took him to far-flung places, and how lonely it all felt. But with each conversation, there were details that didn't quite add up. The first red flag came just a month into their relationship. David mentioned a sudden business deal that had gone sideways. He explained that he had funds tied up in an overseas account and needed a small loan to cover an urgent expense. He promised it would be temporary, just a bridge until his money came through. Susan hesitated, but David was quick to reassure her. He called her late that night, his voice filled with gratitude. "You're the only person I can trust with this. I wouldn't ask if it wasn't important." Against her better judgment, Susan transferred the money. Her friends and family grew concerned as she spoke more about David. They pointed out inconsistencies in his stories and warned her to be careful. But each time Susan doubted him, David seemed to know exactly how to pull her back in. He sent her photos of himself in hospital rooms, claiming to be injured, or emails filled with heartfelt promises of their future together. For Susan, the possibility of love outweighed the whispers of doubt. What she didn't know was that every photo, every excuse, every plea for help had been meticulously planned. David was crafting a story so convincing that even the strongest skeptic might have believed it. Over the next few months, David's requests became more frequent and more urgent. He spoke of equipment delays, payroll issues, and even medical emergencies. Each time he framed it as a temporary setback, a bump in the road that would soon be smoothed out. But what David didn't ask for in words, he made up for in the emotional pull of his messages. Susan found herself dipping into her retirement fund to help him. When that ran out, she took out loans. She sold jewelry, canceled planned trips, and even borrowed from friends to keep up with his escalating needs. By the time she realized just how much she had given, it was too late. In total, Susan had wired $87,000 to David, her entire life savings. The moment of realization came one quiet evening when Susan tried to call him, but the line went dead. She checked her email, her messages, nothing. It was as if David Marks had vanished. Sitting alone in her living room with unpaid bills spread across the table and her bank account drained, Susan felt the weight of betrayal crash down on her. But what made it worse was knowing she had trusted him, defended him, and given him everything she had. For many, this would have been the end of the story. But for Susan, it was just the beginning. With nothing left to lose, she made a decision that would take her halfway across the world and into the heart of a tangled web of deceit. Susan Carter had spent months in despair, but despair eventually gave way to determination. With no answers and no closure, she decided she couldn't let this end with silence. She needed justice, or at the very least, the truth. That's when she turned to Michael Bennett, a seasoned private investigator known for his work in uncovering fraud. Susan handed him everything she had: emails, photos, bank records, and their months-long correspondence. If anyone could find the man behind the facade, it was Michael. What Michael uncovered was a trail of deceit that spanned continents. The polished, charming David Marks was nothing more than a persona, carefully constructed to deceive. His real name was James Nwosu, a skilled con artist operating out of Lagos, Nigeria. James wasn't a wealthy entrepreneur, nor had he ever traveled abroad for business. Instead, he was part of a larger network of scammers targeting vulnerable individuals like Susan. Armed with this new information, Susan faced a choice: let the truth lie or take matters into her own hands. Susan chose the latter. She made the bold decision to travel to Lagos herself, a move most would call reckless, even dangerous. But for Susan, it wasn't just about the money. It was about reclaiming her power. Michael, reluctant at first, agreed to accompany her. Together, they began planning a confrontation, one that would require precision, nerves, and a willingness to walk straight into the unknown. Before leaving, Susan packed a small suitcase. Among her belongings were printed emails, a photo of the man she thought she loved, and the last remaining fragments of her trust. As she boarded the plane, her mind raced. She had no guarantees of safety, no assurances that this would end the way she hoped, but she knew she couldn't live with the regret of inaction. Days later, Susan and Michael arrived in Lagos, navigating its chaotic streets with a mix of apprehension and focus. Michael had devised a plan to lure James out. He posed as another potential victim, using a fake profile to catch the scammer's attention. The bait worked. James agreed to meet at a small cafe in the heart of the city, a place bustling with enough activity to provide anonymity. At least, that's what he thought. Susan sat at a corner table, her heart pounding as she clutched her phone. Michael sat a few feet away, his eyes scanning the room. At precisely 2 p.m., James walked in. He was younger than Susan had imagined, his confident stride betraying no sign of guilt or fear. He scanned the room, looking for his next mark, until his eyes locked on Susan's. For a split second, confusion flickered across his face, followed by recognition, and then panic. Susan didn't wait. She stood, her voice steady but charged with emotion. "Do you remember me, James? Or should I call you David?" The cafe fell silent as heads turned toward the confrontation unfolding. James stammered, denying at first, but Susan wasn't finished. She pulled out a stack of papers, printed emails, bank transactions, and photos, and placed them on the table in front of him. "This is everything you stole from me, my money, my trust, my future." James's initial denial gave way to defensiveness. He claimed it wasn't personal, that he was just trying to survive. But as Susan pressed on, her voice rising with each word, his facade cracked. He admitted to the scam, though his tone remained devoid of remorse. For Susan, the admission was both a victory and a wound. The man she had once cared for was nothing more than a stranger, a liar who had preyed on her loneliness. Before James could leave, Michael signaled to local authorities waiting outside. They entered the cafe, their presence cutting through the tension like a knife. James tried to flee, but it was too late. As he was led away in handcuffs, Susan stood motionless, watching the man who had turned her life upside down disappear into the crowd. For the first time in months, she felt a weight lift. Justice, though imperfect, had been served. In the days following James's arrest, Susan found herself caught between relief and disbelief. The man who had shattered her trust and drained her life savings was finally in custody, his arrogance replaced by the cold reality of handcuffs and interrogation rooms. But as investigators began peeling back the layers of James Nwosu's life, the story grew far more complex. What initially appeared to be the work of one man soon revealed itself to be part of a vast operation, a meticulously coordinated network of scammers preying on vulnerable individuals worldwide. These weren't random acts of deception. They were calculated, deliberate, and devastating. James, it turned out, was just one cog in a machine designed to exploit loneliness and trust for financial gain. Susan worked closely with local authorities, providing every piece of evidence she had painstakingly gathered. Emails, wire transfers, and fake documents painted a damning picture. Investigators discovered that James had dozens of online personas, each carefully crafted to ensnare his victims. His targets ranged from retirees to single parents, each with their own story of heartbreak and loss. For Susan, justice wasn't just about seeing James arrested. It was about ensuring no one else would fall victim to his lies. Her cooperation led to a larger investigation, one that would eventually dismantle parts of the network James operated within. Yet, even as the authorities made progress, Susan couldn't shake the thought. How many others like James were still out there, weaving their traps for the next unsuspecting victim? Months later, Susan returned to Ohio, carrying with her the weight of an experience that had changed her forever. The woman who had once sought companionship online was now a voice of caution, determined to warn others about the dangers of digital deception. Susan began sharing her story, speaking at community centers, schools, and online forums. She wanted others to see the warning signs she had missed and to understand that scams like these thrived in silence. But Susan's journey was far from over. Though James had been arrested and his network partially dismantled, the scars he left behind couldn't be erased with a courtroom verdict. Susan had lost more than just her savings. She had lost her sense of trust. Yet she refused to let that loss define her. Slowly, she began rebuilding her life, surrounded by family and friends who had stood by her through the darkest moments. Statistics tell a sobering story. In the past year alone, victims of online romance scams lost over $1 billion globally. For every Susan Carter who comes forward, countless others remain silent, too ashamed or afraid to speak out. Susan knew this all too well, which is why her mission wasn't just about healing, it was about prevention. As she closed her journal one evening, reflecting on the twists and turns her life had taken, one question lingered in her mind. How many more Davids were out there? How many more lives would be upended before the scams stopped? For Susan, the answers were unknown, but she also knew this. By telling her story, she had taken the first step in breaking the cycle of exploitation. And that, in itself, was a victory. Susan Carter's story is one of heartbreak, resilience, and an unyielding determination to fight back against those who exploit the vulnerable. Her courage serves as a warning and a reminder that even in the darkest moments, there's strength to be found in taking a stand. But now, the question turns to you. If you were in Susan's position, faced with the charming facade of trust betrayed, what would you have done? Would you have risked everything to confront the truth, or would the fear of uncovering more lies have held you back? These stories, though painful, are critical to understanding the hidden dangers lurking in the digital age. Susan's journey sheds light on the real human cost of online scams, but it's also part of a larger conversation. Every comment, every shared story helps build awareness. Your voice matters. So what do you think? Could this have been prevented? Are there red flags that others should look out for? We want to hear your thoughts. Join the discussion in the comments below and help create a community of support and awareness. And if this story resonated with you, consider subscribing to our channel for more real-life crime stories that reveal the unseen battles people face every day. By subscribing, liking, and sharing, you're helping us uncover the truth one story at a time. Susan's journey may have ended here, but the fight against online fraud continues. Together, we can shed light on these schemes and prevent others from falling victim. Remember, awareness is the first step toward protection.